Alrighty, so next we're going to, now that we know how to solve equations, now we're going to do some review that we learned at the beginning of this class, and we're going to throw in what you just learned and review what we reviewed at the beginning of this class with function notation. So just to review here, the letter H is just telling us this is the function we're talking about. And then in the parenthesis is the number we'd plug in for x. And so here it doesn't tell us to plug in anything in for x. It's saying, so I'm going to copy down the problem, h of x equals x squared minus x minus 6. So in this problem it's saying let h of x, let this be 0. So that's exactly what we just learned in 6.8 is how to solve an equation when it equals 0. So to solve this equation, we have to factor it. There is no GCF, so we have to think of what multiplies to negative 6, and it has to add to negative 1. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can find those two numbers. So it has to add to a negative, so I know the bigger number is negative. Has to multiply to a negative, so this one has to be positive. And we see that 2 and negative 3 work. So then I'm going to have x plus 2 and then x minus 3. And then we set each of these equal to 0. And we got x equals negative 2 and x equals 3. So x equals negative 2 and x equals 3. Whereas over here it says to find h of 0. So again, when there's a number inside the parenthesis, it's just telling us what number to substitute in for all the x's. So 0 squared is 0. And then 0 minus 6 is just negative 6. So the answer to this one is negative 6. If I bring this down, this is just the label. It's saying when I plug 0 in for x, that's the answer we get. Now the next thing we're going to review is how to find the x and the y-intercept. So remember, to find the x-intercept, that is when you're going to plug in a 0 for the y value and find the x. So think of it this way. If I want to find where the point lands on the x-axis, I have to find the x value when the y is 0. Now keep in mind that the highest exponent tells you, so the highest exponent tells you at most how many times it would cross the x-axis. So if we look here, the highest exponent's 2, so it tells us that this one, if we graph it, can touch at most twice, and you could see it touches twice here. And then to find the y-intercept is where does the graph cross the y-axis? It is when we plug in a 0 for the x. So I put the graph here, but let's ignore the graph for a second. So if we are asked to find the x and the y-intercept algebraically, it means don't graph it. And to find the x-intercept, remember f of x is the same thing as y. It's just representing the output. So if I want to know, without looking at this graph, where this equation, where this function crosses the x-axis, if I want to find the x-intercept, I leave the x in the problem and I put the 0 over here. And then I'm going to solve this equation here. To factor it, it doesn't have a GCF, but I know that x times x is x squared and 2 times 2 is 4, so it's a difference of 2 squares. And then I set each of these equal to 0. And we would get negative 2 and positive 2. Now remember, an x and a y-intercept is a point. So when we write our answer, we're going to write it as an ordered pair. So it's going to cross at -2 when y is 0. So remember, x always goes first, y goes second. So there was a 0 for the y. And at 2, 0. So if we check the graph, here it is. It crosses at -2, 0, and it crosses at 2, 0. So that's what the x-intercept is. It's where does the graph cross the x-axis. Now the y-intercept. To find the y-intercept, I'm going to leave the y in the problem, and I'm going to plug in a 0 for the x. So 0 squared is 0, and 0 minus 4 is -4. So we get y equals -4. So that means x goes first, y goes second. When x is 0, the y is -4. So if we look here, it crosses right here at the -4. Okay, so let's try another one like that. So first of all, the highest exponent's 3. That means it should cross the x-axis at most 3 times. So we're going to ignore this graph, but if you look here, it does. It crosses 3 times on the x-axis here. So the way that we're going to do it in the class is we're going to do it algebraically. So to find the x-intercept, we leave all the x's in the problem, and we put a 0 in for the y. So to solve this equation, the first step to factor is to look for a GCF. So x goes into all of these. So x, and then x times x squared is x cubed. X times x is x squared. And then x times -12 is -12x. Then if we look here, it doesn't have a 1 as the highest exponent, so we're going to see if this can now be factored. So this is a trinomial, 1, 2, 3. So when there's 3 terms, we do the rainbow. There's no number there, so it's just what multiplies to -12 and adds to 1. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can figure that out. Now, because it has to because it has to add to a positive, I know the bigger number is positive. Since it has to multiply to a negative, I know the smaller number is negative. So that's how I know to use -3 and 4. So I'm going to have x minus 3 and x plus 4. And then I'm going to bring down this x and the equals and the 0. And the highest exponent was 3. And notice we have 3 factors. So we're going to set them each equal to 0. And then we're going to solve each of these equations. So this one's already done. So we get x equals 0, we get x equals 3, and we get x equals -4. So what we just did was we found the ordered pairs where the graph crosses the x-axis. So 0, 0, 3, 0, and -4, 0. So if we look at our graph, there's 0, 0, there's 3, 0 right here, and there's -4, 0. So we did it algebraically what the graphing calculator can tell us. All right, the next thing is to find the y-intercept. So to find the y-intercept, we leave the y in the problem, and then we're going to plug 0 in for all the x's. So when we do that, we get 0 cubed, that's 0, 0 squared, that's 0, and anything times 0 here is 0, and we just get 0 here. So that means it's going to cross at 0, 0. And you could see here's the y-axis, and the point on the y-axis here is right there at 0.